Are you guys going back to school? Are you physically going to the classroom? I know some of you do homeschooling. Are you doing your schooling online? Because we know things are a little bit different nowadays with what's going on. But it made me think, did Jesus go to school? Because if you look in the Bible, it doesn't say much about when Jesus went to school. But he had to go to school, didn't he? And it would probably be outside like this, and probably in the heat. So, by the way, if you are outside in the heat, make sure you have some water to hydrate. I'm sure in Jesus' time, we know they didn't have plastic bottles with caps on them. And you know they didn't have refrigerators, so I'm sure they had water nearby. So make sure you hydrate, because it is hot outside. And in Jesus' day, I'm sure they had to go outside and do their learnings. But what does the Bible say about Jesus going to school? Well, it doesn't say much. There's a couple hints in the Bible, and the first hint is in the book of Luke. So let's come over here and look at the book of Luke. We're going to go to the 14th chapter. I'm sorry, the 4th chapter, verse 16. So we'll get past all this writing. It's way down here. And what it says is, Jesus traveled to Nazareth, the town where he grew up, and on the Sabbath day, he went to the synagogue. As he did, he stood up and read. So we know that Jesus knew how to read, because it says here that he went to the synagogue and he stood up and he read. So he had to read. Somebody had to teach him how to read, right? Think about that for a second. Somebody taught you how to read. Yeah. Somebody taught you how to write. There was a teacher somewhere that taught you how to read and taught you how to write. So in Jesus' day, it says in Luke 4:16 that he went on the Sabbath day, stood up, and he read. Okay, so Jesus had to go to school to learn how to read, didn't he? Then there's another hint that in the New Testament that talks about that Jesus might have went to school. So let's come over here, and it's in the book of John. So we're going to go one book over, the book of John. We're going to go chapter 8, verse 6, which is way down here. And it says, they were saying this to trick Jesus. They wanted to catch him saying something wrong so they could charge him. But Jesus stooped down and started writing on the ground with his finger. So Jesus stooped down and he started writing on the ground with his finger. Well, that tells us that Jesus knew how to write. Okay, so somebody had to teach him how to read. Somebody had to teach him how to write. So did Jesus go to school? Well, we really don't know, but we do know that he knew how to read and he knew how to write. But how did kids learn back then? I started thinking about that too. So we look at my notes. It was the responsibility of the father, not the mother. It was the responsibility of the father to make sure that the son, now we're going to talk about the boys right now because we're talking about Jesus. We'll talk about girls later. It was the responsibility of the father that the son was taught. So the father said, okay, there's Jesus. So there's Joseph, his earthly father, saying, okay, Jesus, it's my job to make sure you get taught. That's one thing. And they had to focus on memorizing. Yeah, as soon as a child learned how to speak, they taught him how to memorize the Bible verses. And they had to memorize it. You know why? Because there weren't any books. You couldn't go back and look back into a book. You had to memorize everything. So if they taught you something, you had to memorize it because you can't go back in a book and read it because books were expensive. And not everybody had books. So we're kind of fortunate these days that we have books. So they had to memorize it. Also, the student had to repeat back to the teacher every time the teacher said something, so they can help in that memorize. And at age 6, a child learned their letters. Now they didn't have the same letters as us because it was a different language. But at age 6, the child had to learn his letters, not just forwards, but he had to learn it going backwards too. That's crazy. They had to learn how to write forwards and backwards. I'm telling you, I couldn't do that. I don't think I could write backwards like I do forwards. And then, because they had to memorize what they learned, that's why if you read in the New Testament, Jesus will talk about Bible verses, but he won't say them all. He'll start off a verse from the Old Testament, and then he'll stop. And you know why he did that? Because he knew the people knew the rest of the verse, because they memorized them when they were kids. So think about how you're learning. Do you learn your letters backwards and forward? Probably not. Do you have to memorize? Sometimes you have to memorize. Do you have books to refer to? Yes, you have books. Back in Jesus' day, when he went to school, he didn't have books. They didn't have a dry erase board, and they probably did it outside in the heat. And again, when you're in the heat, make sure you hydrate, because it's hot outside. So, now, usually when they went to school, the students back in Jesus' day, they would learn Bible stuff. They would go to the book of Leviticus first. Where is Leviticus in our Bible? Think about it for a second. The book of Leviticus, it's in the Old Testament. It's the 3rd book in the Bible. And why did the kids learn Leviticus first? Because the book of Leviticus talks about rules and how you should live your life. So the teachers back in Jesus' day would take the little kids when they're 5 and 6 years old and teach them the book of Leviticus, so they would learn rules and how to live their life, because that's what it does. That's what that book does. But then as they got older, there was another responsibility on the father. The father had to teach their son a trade. Not just how to go to school and learn school stuff, but they had to teach them how to what they were going to do later in life, a trade. So for example, Jesus' earthly father Joseph was a carpenter. So Joseph taught Jesus how to be a carpenter. So that's why sometimes you'll hear Jesus the carpenter's son, or Jesus the carpenter, because he's a carpenter. He knew how to make furniture and he can build stuff. So back in Jesus' day, the father had to teach their son a trade. Could be a baker, could be a tent maker. So they had to learn a education, and then they had to learn a trade. Now, also the teachers had big responsibility too. The teachers, so if you went to school back in Jesus' day, the teachers also had to teach values, not just the lessons of reading and some math, the stuff that they normally teach, but they taught the children values. And what I mean by that is the teacher had the responsibility of teaching, treat people fairly, kind of like in the 10 Commandments. Don't show favoritism. This person isn't better than that person. That's what the teachers also had to teach, values. So once the child got to the age of 13, they didn't go to school anymore. That was it. Now with us, when we get to the age of 13, we go to high school. But back in Jesus' day, when you got to the age of 13, it stopped. So how did they learn anymore? Well, when you got to 13 years old, you were taught by adults. So all the adults would go together and have their own little grouping and their own little, learning sessions. So here you would have adults. Let's say my fingers are adults. And then you just turn 13 because you're the pinky, you're the little person. and you would sit here with the adults, and then you would learn with them. So your education ended at the age of 13 at school, but the father still had to teach their son a trade. So in Jesus' case, a carpenter. So did Jesus go to school? I'll get to that question in a second. But what did we learn today? We learned that Jesus knew how to read and write, because the Bible says so. It says in Luke chapter 4 and in John chapter 8, it gives us hints. We also know that it was the father's responsibility to make sure that the son went to school. So we know that Jesus read and write, and it was probably Joseph that sent him to school or the synagogue, because they learned at a church. Third thing we know, the kids had to memorize. They had to memorize everything. And that's kind of hard to do. I know sometimes when we have to memorize our times tables or memorize some science stuff, it could be hard. We also knew back in Jesus' day that teachers did more than just teach lessons. They taught values. They taught the importance of being a good citizen. They would have to teach them, cover your mouth when you sneeze, wash your hands, treat people equally. That was also a teacher's job. And what else did we learn today? That the father also had to make sure that the son learned a trade. They needed to know what to do once they got done learning. Are they going to be a gardener? Are they going to be a carpenter? That's what Jesus was. So, did Jesus go to school? That was our question. Did Jesus go to school? I'm pretty sure he did. He probably went to school. Joseph probably sent Jesus to the church or the synagogue to learn. We know that he learned how to read and write. We know that he learned a trade because he was a carpenter. So, one thing I want to ask each of you. Can you read and write? Yeah. Thank a teacher. Thank that teacher that you know that has taught you these things. Thank your parents for giving you that opportunity to learn. And if you're learning at home, thank that person that is teaching you. If you're learning online, make sure you thank that person on the other side of the computer and thank them for teaching you. Because they have a hard job to do. So make sure you thank them. And another thing I want you to do is thank Jesus. Thank Jesus for taking the sin onto him so that you can live with him forever for those who believe. And when you're with Jesus, you're with him forever. And know what you can do during that time? You can ask Jesus, what did you learn in school? And he'll tell you the whole story. And you know what else? I'll see you next time.